Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, as I always say. And in this video, it's all about encounters and high strangeness in the deep woods. There's one from Alaska, one from northern Canada, one from Tennessee, and everywhere in between. If that sounds like something you're interested in, then definitely pull up a stump with me, and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. For a short time, I was doing some contract work on a secluded reservation that was very far north. It was only accessible by boat, plane, winter roads, and this winter road was only open from December to March. There was a 3-hour drive through the thick forest, across frozen muskeg and rivers. There was no form of lighting or any safety guards. There were stories, many stories, of people disappearing for 12 or more hours on the drive. They would always see strange lights in the sky, often seen, especially driving at night, and these people could only ever recall the 3-hour drive. But their clocks would be wrong. Sometimes they'd be wearing different clothes, all sorts of things. And one time my grandfather told me a story of a UFO that chased him down the road for over an hour. This place is so secluded that near a huge lake, there is what we call unknown land that surrounds it. It doesn't have a name, and not many people go there except for designated campsites and stuff like that. So I was helping out with the summer camp this one year. A lot of the campers were 15 and younger. It was a 2-hour boat ride across the lake to this land where the designated campsite was. And it was a pretty uneventful trip until the very last night. 3 of the kids were just exploring some random part of the woods. Suddenly, they begin to scream, and they all sprint back to camp, nearly running into me. They say that they saw a child, or what looked like a child, calling out to them. The camp leader tells us, another camp leader tells us to never, ever follow these people. She heavily implied that they weren't people. So, that next morning, we're getting ready to leave. They're still talking about the previous night. The camp leader tells them something else that happened to her when she was younger, saying that her and some of her friends saw one of these things. They followed them, and they never came back. And as we're trying to leave, the water gets really rough. We have to disperse the boats out at different times because of currents and waves. So I happened to be in the last group that was leaving with another leader. The boat launches. We get maybe 20 meters before the motor stalls. We start it back up. We go another 20 meters. And this pretty much repeats the entire way back to the res. It definitely felt like there was something at that camp that didn't want us to leave. I've only been camping about a dozen times. Now, for some reason, stuff has been happening to me. Once in western North Carolina, and once in Floyd, Virginia. Maybe I'm just crazy, but none of this started happening until I had an encounter with a black-eyed kid. I was never superstitious until that moment, but now that I've seen that and interacted with it, I feel like the thing is always watching me. Has anyone else had this happen? So here's the camping thing, and this was shortly after the initial encounter. I was trying to get back into it at that point, so I went out and bought most of the essential gear that I could get into, and it wasn't the super expensive stuff, just stuff that's practical and works. And I had a great time, honestly. Until the nighttime, I had s'mores and hot dogs for days, and generally I camp about a mile to half a mile away from anyone, so I can be weird in the woods by myself, I guess. So, in this particular instance, I got woke up at some point in the morning, I'm assuming around 3. By the time I woke up, I was already in a cold sweat, feeling like something was watching me. I hear clearly defined footsteps off in the distance. At first, I thought it was 2 different animals, kind of 50 feet apart or so. I got hearing whimpers, but it wasn't coyote, and I've had coyotes in my camp before. Whatever it is, it seems to walk around the campsite, make weird noises, and throw stuff at my tent. I'm really freaking out. It's not deadfall, because you can hear it rotating through the air, as if it's a stick or something hard. So I had my AR pistol with me, just to keep myself sane. But for that entire night, I had rocks and stuff hit my tent. One of them even came through the tent and hit me in the head. It came through one of those skylight things you can get in some tents. I looked out, and I couldn't see anyone around. In fact, because of the moon, I could see a few feet around me in every direction. No idea what it was, but this happens now every time I go camping, and it only started happening after I had that encounter with a black-eyed child. This happened back when I was 16, and I was living in Alaska. I wake up for school one morning, and I attempt to turn the light on, but the power is out again. This is not really that uncommon of occurrence all the way out here. I grab the flashlight that I keep on the nightstand, and I make my way across the hall to the bathroom. I set the flashlight down, and I start doing the stuff that normal people do in the morning. I look in the mirror as I'm brushing my teeth, and I think I see something move behind me. It scares me, so I turn around slowly and shine the flashlight at the wall. And you guessed it, nothing's there. I decided that I'm just being paranoid and it's dark, so I go back to brushing my teeth. I grab my coat and I head out. It's windy and snowing. Everything is dark. All the street lights have gone out as well. The only source of light is my trusty flashlight. Nothing really happens during my walk to the bus stop, but once I get there, the street light comes back on, so I put my light away, and I see a moose about 30 feet away. I ignore it and just stand there, still. It doesn't go away. It just stands there for a minute, maybe 2, trying to figure me out. Then, the streetlight goes off again. I fumbled around for my light, and I feel a cold chill. Like, it felt like I wasn't even wearing a jacket, even though I had a pretty big one on. Or when you know that something is deeply wrong. I finally get my light out and I turn it on. I shine it on the moose. Its nostrils are flared, and it's jittering around like a horse that's been spooked. The streetlight flickers and turns on again. Suddenly, the moose is gone. I'm absolutely crapping my pants at this point. There's no footprints or anything in the snow. It's like the moose just vanished. After a few more minutes, the school bus arrives. I'm visibly shaking as I get on the bus. I sit down, and my friend asks me, "What's wrong?" I just say that I had a stressful morning, and I put in my earbuds. I look out the window at the spot where I was standing, and there's a jet black figure standing underneath the streetlight again, which is now back on. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. What happened to the moose? What was that thing? Alaska is such a odd place. Back in the day, when I was 14 years old, I thought I was super tough for carrying this recurve bow. It was a 50-pound one. A few cousins were over visiting, so I decided to take them into the woods, 'cause trying to be cool and stuff. It's about 5 p.m. and in the summer, so there's plenty of light and it's hot as balls out. I take the cousins out to see this abandoned house that's way back in the woods. I take them on the grand tour of the house. My friends and I busted out a window and kicked the back door in. Again, we were teenagers, just thought we were tough shit. The house had been abandoned since at least 1995. There was a calendar on the wall from that year. So I'm talking like I'm tough about scaring off animals and storing weed and cigarettes in this abandoned house. I actually didn't even smoke at the time, just trying to impress my older cousins. We heard a loud bang from the back bedroom. I knew that a very large, angry opossum was living in there. None of us wanted to, screw around with that part of the house. It had scratched one of my friends to the point where he needed stitches before. I'm believing that the opossum is just mad that someone's there. My cousins are freaked out, so I explained to them about the animal. But then there's more loud banging, this time from the hallway. I go to investigate. The opossum is clearly beyond dead, splattered all over the hallway. I think that whatever did that is probably still in the house. I tell everybody that we're leaving immediately. I stepped out the back door and looked around for adults because, to be honest, I wasn't even supposed to be this far back in the woods. The coast was clear, so I thought we had a chance to run. We heard rustling as soon as we all leave the house. I draw back my bow and I just fire on whatever it is in the bushes. I still don't know if I hit it or if I scared it, but that scream was the most inhuman noise I had ever heard up until that point. Everybody backtracks and runs back into the house. We stay in there for a few minutes, trying to figure out what to do. And then all of a sudden, one of the cousins starts screaming about a gray-skinned man crawling on all fours up the wall of the house. I immediately assume the worst. I bust open the front door, and we all haul ass out of the house. As we're running, there's trees and bushes crashing behind us, along with more screeching. We eventually get home, safe and sound. We agreed to not tell our parents, but the next morning, I found the arrow, and it was jammed into the tire of my dad's truck. Occasionally, for years after that, we would hear the screeching late at night sometimes, but I never did go back to that abandoned house. I live out in rural Tennessee, and as you can imagine, it gets all kinds of dark out here. So, it was my 18th birthday, October, and there were around 25 people all gathered at my house. It was the perfect kind of chilly weather for manhunt. And if you don't know what that is, one guy runs off into the woods. Everyone else waits an hour or so, or however long, and then hunts him with paintball guns or airsoft guns or whatever you have. Now, we planned on multiple rounds throughout the night, and a couple of rounds went by, and there was no big deal. It was a super fun time. And during this one round, my 10-year-old brother drew the short straw. I really didn't want to let him go hide, but he begged me to. So I thought, okay, just only go where you know. And we tried to find him for 6 hours. And I mean, we searched everywhere. Could not find him anywheres. But One of my friends eventually found him, terrified, and way up in a tree in a hunter's perch. The friend who found him said that he kicked him in the face and almost knocked him clear off the tree at first. I asked him why. My little brother tells me that he heard me trying to find him below the perch hours earlier. He peeks out. It isn't me. It isn't even a person. It's the outline of a person, but they're not a person. It stayed below the tree, almost as if it could smell him, calling his name for a few hours. It only ran off when it heard us coming to actually find him. Nothing like this ever happened again, and this happened back in 2014. I asked a friend of mine if he knew anyone who had access to some tools that I needed to finish a project. What the tools were or project doesn't really matter in this sense. He says sure, he knows a guy from work that will be happy to help. Apparently he was interested in the same kind of art, but he warns me that he's a little bit off. One morning I drove my friend to work, so he introduced me. The guy seems pretty distant and withdrawn. He shakes my hand and we chat a bit. He seems real interested in the woodwork I was doing, and we talked about sculptures and such for a little while, things we'd learned, tools we used, etc. The guy warms up after a bit, and I ask him if it would be alright if I checked out some of his stuff. He hesitantly agrees, kind of like when you're trying to come up with an excuse but just can't. He tells me to swing by that night. He says we can chat over a few beers. That sounds good to me, but later that night I get a call. It's the guy. He sounds shaken up. He says things are chaotic at home, and right now isn't a good time. He'll call me when things calm down. 2 weeks later, the guy calls one afternoon. He says that things have settled down for now, and that he wants me to bring over some of my work as well, to compare and all that stuff. I say sure, and I start to head over, and I quickly notice that this guy lives in the middle of nowhere. I had to call him up just to find the house. It's at the end of a very long driveway, a beautiful acre plus of land. The driveway is littered with trees, and his house is actually pretty nice. As I come up the driveway, something strikes me as odd about the trees that I'm passing up. They all have faces carved into them, facing the driveway. Twisted, pained faces. I didn't think much of it. Sometimes I make morbid stuff myself, and in fact, I was quite impressed. The amount of detail was staggering. Looking out into the tree line of the property, every tree had a pained face looking in on the house, almost like the woods were watching you wherever you were. This kind of creeped me out. Looking out was like seeing 100 or so white faces just crying out in pain. Kind of like they wanted your attention. I knock on the door. The guy answers with a beer in hand. He's much friendlier than before. He helps me carry some of my stuff in and shows me around. He seems pretty cool. I begin to notice that each room has one of those same damn faces hanging above the doorframe. The more I saw them, the more I begin to feel sick. Up close, the faces were more detailed than I had imagined, almost surrealistic. I asked him what his focus on the faces were for, and the guy kind of tensed up and dodged my question. Upon entering his workshop, which was super sweet by the way, he seemed to have other interests besides creepy faces. He had entire 7-foot sculptures of women, men, animals, etc., all of them very well done. And there's another large one in the back of his workshop that has a tarp over it, just chilling there. He says that it isn't done yet, and the way he says it makes me not want to press it further. It was right in front of a door that I think led to another room. We began working on stuff together, trading stories and times we had accidentally injured ourselves. Suddenly, the subject changes. The guy asks me what I think about God and the afterlife. I tell him that I'm not super religious, but I don't rule anything out. I just don't go to church or anything. The guy gets a bit flustered by this, gets a bit loud, says it's all a blatant lie. He was told so. I say, by who? He kind of silenced for a moment, and then he abruptly asked me if I believe in spirits. I gave him the same kind of answer. It's possible, I don't rule anything out. He starts looking around the room, as if seeing if anyone is around, and then his voice goes soft, and he whispers for a moment. He says, I see things in the woods. At dusk, I can see their shadows. Sometimes they whisper from the trees, and I can hear them. I immediately think that this guy is obviously mentally disturbed, given everything else. But I egg him on. I try to ask him what they tell him. They tell him that everything is a lie, that God is a lie, the afterlife is a lie. The only thing after death is darkness. He says they laugh at him and leave dead animals at his tree line. I am officially freaked the F out at this point. He said for a while they visited him at night, and each face carving represented a different spirit that had visited him. He says they can't stand looking at themselves in death, so they don't step within the tree line, thus why he has the entire thing carved out. I'm pretty quiet at this point. I hadn't gotten goosebumps like this ever since I was a kid, and I had chills constantly running up my spine. He told me that they try and talk to him from the tree line at night, to try and get him to leave his home. I eagerly try to change the subject. The guy looks down and just keeps talking. He's pale as a sheet, and was obviously genuinely terrified. He even kind of looks like he's welling up with tears. He tells me that I'm the only person he's told. Knowing I'm a stranger, he apologizes. He says he's scared and doesn't know what to do anymore. I try my best to awkwardly console this stranger, and the guy kind of starts to break down. Personally, I think he needs help, but it's not my place to try and give it to him. Regrettingly, I ask him why he's afraid. He said the faces aren't working anymore. 2 weeks ago, he had something terrible in his living room. I say, what was it? He walks over to the tarp sculpture and pulls the tarp off to reveal the most mangled, terrible thing I have ever seen. It hardly resembled a human being. It was terrifying to have imagined that this guy seeing it standing in his living room. Shortly after this, there's a loud bang on the wall to my right. I nearly jumped out of my skin. The guy didn't even flinch. Then again, another bang, and then it just continued, on and on, continuously, like hail hitting a tin roof. The guy screams, "Stop it," and it ceases. After that, I just grabbed my shit, tell the guy I'm sorry and I have to get out of here. I got out of there as quickly as possible. As I'm leaving his home and driveway, I look in the rearview mirror, and the trees are darker than I've ever seen. They have shadows all around them. The guy calls me a week later and apologizes. He said he was being silly and everything is okay now. My friend told me that the guy actually quit, and none of them heard from him, nor could they get a hold of him after that. So, what'd you think of those? Let me know which one was your favorite one down in the comments. Do you have one of your own? I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you want to. I also have a PayPal and a Patreon if that's something that you would like to do as well. No pressure though. And before I go, I would like to mention that I also have an experience playing Manhunt, but mine is not scary, it's actually just funny. So it was a similar type of area, like a lot of woods around and stuff, as per is the norm in my province anyways. So we get the idea that we're going to use airsoft guns for ours because at the time you had to be 18, I think, to buy paintball guns. I don't know what it's like now. But we also didn't wait a half hour, it was more like 20 minutes or so that someone had to go hide. And when I say it was funny, I mean like nothing really happened the first few rounds until we were looking for someone and we found a different guy. And this poor guy was stoned out of his mind. He thought that we were the cops coming to get him for smoking weed, which obviously we were like 6 teenagers playing Manhunt in the woods. I don't know, just the whole situation about like looking for a friend and gonna like shoot them with airsoft guns and then finding a totally different stranger in the middle of the forest who's just as confused to see you as you are him, and he's just stoned out of his mind, no idea where he is. He had apparently been walking a trail on an adjacent property and had heard fireworks that we had and thought for some reason that the police were after him for smoking, so he takes off in the woods, and that's when we found him. Anyways, we helped the lad out and got him back to where he was supposed to be, but yeah, just a little funny circumstance thing. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then maybe you can like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And I will put a couple of videos on screen that you can watch or rewatch that you might like. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump. Thank you for watching.